Commander Central, episode 168, and today we're going to be talking to Commander Advisory Group member and level 3 judge, Charlotte Sable. I'm Dana.
I'm Max.
And I'm Charlotte.
Hey! Thank you very much, Charlotte, for joining us on the show and filling in for Chris.
Hey, not a problem. Been listening to the cast for a couple of months now and enjoying it. So when I heard on a recent episode you talking about his injury, I was like, hey, might as well shoot him a message.
That was really unexpected and super cool. When Chris got hurt, we were kind of just casually like, we should maybe have Matt on or one of our friends who also podcast on to fill in, and we mentioned it on the show. Not really thinking, honestly, we didn't think much beyond that. That was the level of planning we did. And then you messaged us, and we've had a couple people that have generously volunteered to also fill in, and I was really kind of shocked. I didn't really think things out and think people would actually want to do that other than a few friends, and so that's been really amazing to have people offer to fill in when he's hurt. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you.
So before we jump into the show and jump into talking about things that are magic related, is there anything interesting in anyone's life going on they want to talk about with Christmas this close? I've been just trying to get ready and stay out of the way of my wife's decorating and cookie making and package wrapping. I'm a hindrance, I think, for the most part. So how about either of you two?
I'm just trying to stay out of the shops when it's like too busy, and it's like, okay, shop in the morning or in the evening, or try and like get my groceries at different times of day than I normally can. So
I mean, it wasn't that many years ago. I do remember having this conversation with my wife where like we would talk about going to see a movie, and the theater here in town is by the mall, and I distinctly remember having this conversation with her where I'm like, I don't want to go see a movie 2 weeks from Christmas because the mall area is so insane, and that really isn't the case anymore. I would guess in part because people shop on Amazon, or at least online in general, in the last 5 to 10 years. So much that has shifted that way. But like when we go out to that area now to go to a movie or something, it's not nearly as crazy as it once was, say 10 years ago with people Christmas shopping. So that's definitely been kind of an interesting change for sure. I'm not sure if either of you two have noticed that, but like that's definitely something I've seen. Max, how about you? Do you have any Christmas plans here?
I still need to Christmas shop. I have 2 days. 2 days from recording this before my family Christmas.
Okay. So you're very much living up to the cliche of the single guy at Christmas time.
Gift cards are totally acceptable, so I'm good with that.
Okay.
Just give cash. Cash is always good.
Right. There you go.
I have 2 young nieces who like the idea of the gift card and, swiping it like mom and dad do, so it's more for them.
Yeah, fair enough.
Cash will be like in 2 more years from now.
Yeah.
I did mention this to Max before we started recording and before you got on, Charlotte, but I'm working from home today. So I'm in like my basement, and I've been in my pajamas basically all morning, and like 15 minutes before the call, I actually had this mental debate. I'm like, we always joke about Max recording with no pants on, but I'm like, I don't know if I'm comfortable recording talking to a stranger in my pajamas. I need to go get changed. So I went and got changed just for this recording because I'm like, I know no one can see me, but it seems kind of disrespectful to be doing this in my pajamas, so I'm going to go put some clothes on.
Yeah, well, as long as you didn't, like, put on a suit or anything.
I did not go that far. I'm still wearing, like, a hoodie and jeans. It's nothing too fancy, but...
Good.
But I'm like, I feel like I probably should be a little more professional than this, so here we are. Mm-hmm. So how about any interesting games anyone played this week? Anything worth talking about there?
I sadly did not play this week.
You did not play. You were distracted by hockey again, Max.
Like normal.
How about you, Charlotte? Any fun games?
Yeah. So I recently finished upgrading my old Oathbreaker deck into a commander deck because, well, Oathbreaker kind of died around here. Like,
okay.
Few people were interested. Few people built decks. No one could seem to get together to actually play it. Anyway, so I finished upgrading my Oathbreaker deck, which is now a Phoenix Persistent Petitioners deck, and I was also lending another player my Rakdos the Showstopper deck, and my Phoenix deck runs about 24 persistent petitioners, and the the Rakdos deck dropped a Trinisphere on turn 3, right on curve, right before me, and I'm like, well, 3 mana petitioners, go. 3 mana petitioners, go. About 7 times over the course of the game. It's like hoisted by my own petard.
Right, you have no one to blame but yourself is the worst part of that kind of interaction.
Although Trinisphere does work in the format, and more people should play it, I think.
I mean, it definitely slows up those decks that want to go crazy, for sure. It kind of puts everyone on the same playing field, definitely. Yeah. Oh, and another game where I was playing the Phoenix deck, I was against someone playing Maelstrom Wanderer, and it's like, I was playing my Rakdos deck, and I got the Trinisphere out, and Maelstrom Wanderer doesn't really like that, so. Right. Yeah, that kind of just stops that dead in its tracks too. Yeah, it's like, you can pay 3 if you want. Good luck. Yeah. The bad one I had last night, it was against, first of all, the deck itself, I was playing against a Moloku, it's a Clouded Mirror. Yeah. And it's a Illusion tribal deck. Nice. And it's hilarious, first of all, and it's not great, but it's a real fun deck to play against, except for he opened, I believe it was a turn 3 Quicksilver Fountain and turn 4 back to basics. Oof. And I had played like 3 I opened with non-basics. I was just completely screwed for 6 turns sitting there, because not only did I have non-basics, I had intentionally kept a hand, and I'm like, it's not great, but I had a Wild Growth or something, because I was playing my Enchantress deck. So I had a couple of land enchantments, and I had put them, of course, on the non-basics I had. So I was thinking I was in pretty good shape, and then, no, my lands don't untap, and they started turning into islands then on top of it. It was just bad business. Oof. The only thing that kind of saved me, and I didn't win the game or do well, was everyone else was kind of in the same boat, and they immediately turned their bullseye on that Moloku deck. So player removal kind of solved that problem. Oh. And even he said, he admitted it. He's like, I knew that was going to happen, but I couldn't not play the Fountain into back to basics. And I'm like, yeah, I get it. That's pretty tempting. Yeah, when you can do it, you do it. Yeah. Right. That's worth getting punched in the jaw to occasionally make that kind of play. And I almost got to live the dream in my Jero deck. I had Gideon, Champion of Justice out, and that's the Gideon where his +1, you put counters on him for each creature an opponent controls. And someone, I think it was an ally deck, General Tazri deck, had 8 creatures, so I was able to roll Gideon up once, and then the next turn, I had the Chain Veil in hand, and I had a Teferi's Protection in hand. So I, roll Gideon up one more time to put him over the limit to do his ult, play the Chain Veil to then do his ult, and then Teferi's Protection to save all my stuff while everyone loses all of their things, and then, of course, win the game pretty easily. But they stopped me when I went to use the Chain Veil to use Gideon a second time. Somebody intervened, and I think they hit Gideon with a Beast Within. Ah. Ooh. It's like, man. and actually the kind of the worst part about it, it was the right play, of course, but I was in really good shape anyway, and I did wind up winning the game 6 turns later, but it just then turned it from me winning the game in 1 turn to everyone having to watch me grind it out and, play a Cathar's Crusade and make a ton of tokens multiple times with that Chain Veil and, put counters on all of them. So it was, like I said, the right play, but I think everyone would have been better off just letting me do it and ending the game versus watching me have to play with... Because I don't even like Cathar's Crusade. Yeah, even if you're the person playing Cathar's Crusade, it's miserable. Yeah, it's one of those cards that, it seems cool, but it's just so much busy work to keep it up. Yes. And, it's a card that definitely is better online. Yes, for sure. And in that particular deck, it's a mono white Planeswalker deck. My win conditions are limited. I basically have to do token beats for the most part. And so I kind of need it in the deck, but man, if I didn't, I absolutely would not run it. It is no fun to manage. So if you out there listening want to reach out to us and tell us about some cool games you played, how would you do that, Max?
You can hit us up on Twitter by searching at CMDR Central. We're on Facebook, YouTube, pretty much the entire interwebs by searching CMDR Central. You can also find us over at Flipside Gaming in case you need a copy of Cathar's Crusade to up your token game.
Or if you don't.
Or you don't. Use promo code CMDR in all caps to get 10% off all orders, $10 or more.
And we are also on Patreon.com.
Yeah, search CMDR Central there. Check out our reward tiers if you are so inclined to support the show financially. We greatly appreciate it. And we actually have a handful of people to say thank you to this week. So we want to say thank you to the new patrons, David, Josh Gronke, Haribo Weber, Ryan Green, and Tyler Feverston.
I think you probably got one of those right.
And probably it was Ryan.
probably Ryan. That's pretty. That's probably better than I would have done.
Yeah.
So we have a couple contests here that are wrapping up as well.
Yeah.
Literally wrapping up the next week or so.
Yeah. So I found a War of the Spark bundle in my closet, so we're cracking that open and giving 3 packs away on Twitter, and the rest of the bundle away on to a lucky patron supporter.
So if you retweet, I think the tweet you sent out about that.
I did a couple
once
days
a week
ago,
or so
yeah.
again, right?
Yep.
Okay. Very cool. Max, when does the T-shirt contest with you and Chris wrap up? I forgot about that the last week or two.
Well, see, my strategy is working then by not bringing it up.
So you're hoping people would forget. So does that mean Chris is currently ahead? Is that what you're saying?
No. Chris is nowhere near being ahead.
Nice. Maybe he's waiting until the last minute to spring it on you. He's hoping for the sympathy purchases because of his foot.
Yeah, he probably is. But yes, that wraps up at the start of 2020. So just the rest of this week when this episode airs pretty much to get your shirt orders in.
Sounds good. And I think we'll mention here, we had talked about it, I'm not sure if we've said it yet. We had planned on switching video first week in January. We'll probably wait till the end-ish of January when Chris is back, hopefully. So we don't want to start without him. So we'll just wait a couple more weeks to switch over to start shooting these in video until he is back.
Yeah, sounds like a great plan.
Okay. Any more business before we start talking about Magic with Charlotte here?
I have no other business.
Okay. So today we are lucky enough to have Charlotte Sable on the show. Charlotte is currently in Helsinki, Finland, which I had to make a note of because not that I don't know where Helsinki is, but there's a joke in Die Hard where a television reporter calls it Helsinki, Sweden, and then has to be corrected. And that joke has forever since then made me second guess which is correct and which is wrong. So rather than being that guy, I actually made sure I wrote down Finland. Thank you, Die Hard, one of the many treasures you've given us. So we're going to take a look at a few of your decks here in a few minutes because one of the things we kind of like to do a little bit is try to learn something new if we can. And you're literally playing in a foreign meta. You're playing half a world away. So you're going to be playing and seeing different things, at least to a degree, than we see. And I like the idea of looking at decks from somebody who's playing in a place that's radically different from where we're playing. And as a judge, you're probably playing at a level way beyond what I'm playing at as well. So that's kind of fascinating to me, I think, to take a look at. But first, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So I have been judging for about 10 years, a little over 10 years now, and playing Commander almost as long, since before it was Commander, when it was EDH still. I am from the Toronto area in Canada originally, and so that's where I started judging, and also where I started playing Commander. I've been a level 3 judge since 2015, which was right after I moved to Finland. My partner is Finnish, and so it was easier for me to move here to be with her than it was for her to come over to Canada to be with me. And I've always been the more adventurous, travel-y one, so
Sure.
Made sense. I didn't have a ton of I don't have a big family. I don't have a huge amount of ties back to Canada, so it was just easier for me to come this way. And it's been an interesting adventure.
Very cool. Well, so how long have you been playing Magic all told? Did you start playing EDH right away, or were you a Magic player before
EDH was far in the future when I started. I started playing back right before Fallen Empires came out.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So like 95, 96. So basically it was the... No, that would have been like late 94, early 95. Anyway, but yeah, it was the point where the Dark was already getting hard to find in shops, but
Sure.
Fallen Empires wasn't out yet. I mean, I was just in middle school and kind of a dumb kid, so it's not like I was playing any sort of sophisticated deck, but like it was a lunchroom thing, and we all played, and it was cool. I got into it with my brother and my friends and his friends, and it was good. And there was a local card shop that we spent a lot of time hanging out at, which was good because my family was having some issues around then, so it was a good escape from that. But yeah, I ended up taking a break, a fairly long break from Magic, starting around Tempest, because, well, you know, my family sort of exploded, and that, you know, changed my circumstances a fair amount.
Sure.
I didn't get seriously back into the game until Time Spiral, which, you know, like a lot of people, is, you know, a big way to pull old players back into the game, I think.
Was that what it was? Was it the nostalgia stuff from Time Spiral that brought you back in?
Basically, I was in like a convenience store, and they had, you know, the Magic cards and the Yu-Gi-Oh cards and the Pokemon cards and whatever on the counter. And I was like, I'd always sort of kept up with Magic, but never really gotten back into playing it. But like, I picked up a tournament pack of Time Spiral, and like, two of the rares in it were Lotus Bloom and Jaya Ballard, and so like, oof, right in the nostalgia there.
For sure.
So like, yep. Yeah, I mean, that's what got me hooked. There wasn't much of a community in my area when I got back into it. So I just started like collecting the set just by buying packs, which is not a good way to collect things. But anyway, but then that got into more of a community, and then got into playing more, and that got me into online spaces, which got me into judging, and the ball rolls from there.
Were you ever a competitive player, or were you just someone who was playing and got into judging as kind of like the next logical step for
really.
something to be involved?
Yeah, to me it was more of an issue, like to me it was more of an issue of I know I'm not the quality, like, of the caliber to be a good competitive player. So sure. I figured that the best way for me to sort of be a part of higher level Magic was to become a judge. And
okay,
then,
that makes sense.
And then since then, obviously, my reasons for judging have changed a bit, but, you know. But at the time, it made more sense that way. I've played a couple of Grand Prix back in the day, and, you know, I've won my fair share of FNMs and stuff, but I've never been like a grinder or anything, so.
Okay. So how did you first get involved with playing Commander? Was it just something people around you were playing and you gave it a try? How did that first happen?
Basically, it was through the judge program. Like, one of my mentors, when I was coming up as a judge, was Gavin Duggan, who's a rules committee member. And that was sort of the era when, like, EDH and judges were kind of inseparable. And so, like, a lot of judges would be bringing decks to events and stuff. And so that's where I sort of picked it up, and got interested in it. And, yeah, it just sort of grew from there.
What was the first deck you built when you first got into Commander?
Earl the Miststalker.
Yay!
Okay, all right.
I don't have my Earl deck any longer, sadly, but it served me very well over the years. But,
I mean, that's still a completely playable Commander, too.
Yeah, it absolutely is. It just ended up sort of calcifying, you know, when decks get to the point where it's really hard to find things good enough to add to them or change.
Sure.
And so eventually, like, to try and spice it up, I ended up dropping red, and it was like a Krond deck for a while. But
oh man, Krond is pretty rough too.
Yeah, Krond is cool though. I mean, he's pretty awesome. But anyway, it was a Krond deck for a while, but then I eventually dropped it once I had more decks. But I mean, I'll always love Earl. I still have the foil Earl that I had at the time, so.
I think that's a little bit of a problem with Enchantress to a degree, too. There tends to be generally some real clear-cut cards you want to run in the deck, and when a new set comes out, they tend to be kind of pretty clear-cut, too. Like, we just got that new Enchantress spoiled
all that glitters.
from Theros.
Well, there's all that glitters, and then the new one, the green one, Setessid and whatever.
Yeah, and that will go in every Euro deck. It'll go in like every Sigarda deck, and
it's going right in my Yarok Enchantress deck.
Yeah, right. So I agree. That's kind of been, because I have a Sigarda Enchantress deck, and I know what you say. I think especially Enchantress decks do kind of have that tendency to calcify because there's just such clear build paths no matter who the commander is.
Well, yeah, any sort of very sort of linear strategy is going to sort of calcify over time because there's just going to be the best things to do in that deck, right?
You two are making me very depressed thinking about where Tuvasa will eventually end up one day.
One thing I do kind of like with the Tuvasa deck, I think having blue in there does open things up a little bit more than if you're just going the real traditional Selesnya route. I do think the blue helps.
Yeah. I mean,
red does too.
Red added a lot of interesting stuff, like what's it called? Oh, okay, there it is. Yeah, so Bestial Fury is like a sweet card for a red Enchantress deck.
And I think I've seen someone use as a Miles area where you win the game if you control a creature with power 20
Miles
or more.
area is sweet as well, obviously. I won a couple of games with that over time, so.
So yeah, I do think Enchantress having a few colors does definitely help if you're getting out of just Selesnya.
Yeah.
So you mentioned you knew Gavin Duggan going in. When you got asked to be on the CAG, how well did you know the other people that were on the CAG or on the rules committee?
I actually know. It's actually funny. I actually know all of the members of the rules committee a lot better than I knew most of the people on the CAG.
Okay.
Because I've known Gavin since pretty much right when I started judging. I met Sheldon through judging. I met Toby through judging. I met Scott through judging GPs and stuff. And I know all of them fairly well, and I've gotten on fairly well with them. As for the CAG itself, the only one of them that I've actually met in person is Ron, who is also, who I also met through GPs because he was, Wizards organized play for a long time. And so like the other people, like I knew of them, and I might have interacted with them like on social media before, but I'd never like met them in person. Well, still haven't met them in person. Hopefully in the future, fingers crossed. But yeah, so like, I know the whole CAG, or I know the whole rules committee. Yeah, so I mean, I guess I was just on everyone's mind when they were sort of figuring out who to ask.
So how's that experience been so far? Because it's been about a year, right? That was January of 2019, and that was first announced?
Yeah, it was January. It's been really good. At first, it was a little bit frustrating because me and a lot of the other CAG members wanted to make changes. Like, we wanted, movement.
Sure.
But for the first couple of times, the first meeting... basically was like right after we formed, so there wasn't any input from us, and then like the rules committee decided that they wanted to like work on the philosophy document, so they decided to not make any changes at that point. And then finally the next one was the one where we managed to change the ban list with Iona and Engine on and Painter off. But like now that we've actually sort of had some effect on the RC and on the ban list, people are feeling a lot better. Also, like, I think the growing pains and the sort of learning each other has sort of gotten a bit better.
Sure.
We sort of know how to communicate. People, like, the conflicts of personality have sort of worn off their rough edges and stuff. So it's all good.
From the outside looking in at it, I think it's definitely done a really nice job with the communication with people on the CAG, and therefore people actually on the rules committee. It's just added a layer of, I don't know if visibility or transparency is the right word, but you just see a lot more voices talking about it just having the CAG exist than you did a year ago.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It definitely is a really good thing that like we're out there having our voices heard and, you know, talking about the format and talking with people and taking that information back to the RC. But like, yeah. And it's also just really good. Just the CAG has such sort of a diverse sort of mix of experience and views and channels and that sort of thing that it's really, really cool that like when we can get together and sort of butt heads and actually sort of hash out how we actually feel about things.
Well, and it's also, you know, you mentioned like a diversity of opinion. It's also been nice knowing that there's a group of people that aren't just the middle-aged white guy on the CAG, or on the rules committee, because that's what it was, and that's, you know, it is what it is. It's Magic. There's for a lot of years that was pretty predominantly what the Magic community was.
Yep.
But getting fresh voices on there is, I think, really, really important. And Sheldon and the Rules Committee did a very nice job with that, I think, on the CAG.
Yeah. Well, thanks.
So that's been great for the community, and that's really cool to see. Feel free to not answer this question about Paradox Engine. I have maintained the main problem with Paradox Engine and why it got banned was not that it was too good, but that people that weren't good with Paradox Engine made games miserable. Would you have any comment on that? And do not feel you have to at all.
In my personal opinion wasn't based on that. I mean, that certainly contributed a little bit, but mostly it was just the card was just sort of overwhelmingly powerful and centering in games. The same sort of way that Primetime or Prophet of Kruvix was back in the day.
Whereas you felt like you kind of had to run it in
You had
decks.
to have it or destroy it or take control of it or reanimate it or whatever, right? Like
that makes sense.
The game becomes about the engine as opposed to being about the game, right?
Sure. Yeah, I can completely see that.
And especially in the case of Paradox Engine, which is part of combos, you have a very short window to deal with it, right? So,
and it's a combo that oftentimes too even if you were executing it correctly and making the best play, it didn't always win the game.
Oh yeah, it's non-determinate. It's non-deterministic. Right. It can fizzle out. Well, I mean, some of the combos are non-deterministic. There are certain situations where you can make it do everything you want, like. But yeah. Anyway.
And even if it didn't fizzle out, like if someone plays Blood Bond, they win the game.
Yeah.
If someone played a Paradox Engine, they'd probably win the game in 4 to 6 minutes. No, but they don't necessarily. I mean, like that was one of the problems with it as well, for sure. All right. Should we talk about a few of your decks?
Yeah, absolutely.
So this isn't really deck related necessarily, but are there any big differences in the EDH scene or meta in Finland versus like the US or Canada where you've played in the past?
Again, I think just in general in Europe, the biggest difference, at least to sort of just the makeup of decks, is going to come just in terms of card availability, because one of the best things about Magic in Europe is Magic Card Market, which is just this amazing just person-to-person selling thing that just like keeps the secondary market prices fair and a lot lower than the US in like 95% of cases. Like, for example, I just did a lookup today. So, for example, on Magic Card Market, the cheapest reasonable condition Cabal coffers you can get in any language is 19 euros versus $33 on TCG Player. And if you're looking for decent condition English, the cheapest on Magic Card Market is 26 euros versus $40 on TCG Player. So
there's a pretty decent price difference then for like those kind of EDH staple-ish cards.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, again, I personally don't like playing with a lot of non-English cards, but it certainly, if the price difference matters a lot, it can be a fairly big deal. Like, I mean, I recently acquired, when I was back a little bit when I was building my Yarok deck, I ended up buying a French polluted bonds versus an English one, because the French one was like 3 euros and the English was like 9. So it was like, yeah, I'll just play a third and get this card.
Sure, that makes sense completely.
As for just general like meta, I don't think there's too much of a difference. People build and play what they want to build and play. Like there's not so much of a CEDH scene. I think there's a small one in Finland, but like I mean, at the shop I play at, there's decks of all sorts of power levels, from adjusted precons to not quite CEDH, but very, very highly tuned decks.
So the conversation about power level is still something that has to be dealt with over there as well.
In general, yeah. I mean,
okay.
But you do sort of get mismatches. There was a game the other day where there was one player whose decks were just obviously like a tier or two below everyone else's, and they didn't seem to be having a really good time compared to the other three of us. So.
And that's the kind of thing even that's always been a problem, I think, in Commander, and even talking about it, I think there's always that struggle where one person's idea of what a mid-power deck isn't always the same as what someone else's is.
Exactly, but I mean, I think in general, even still, we don't have. You'll sometimes have people going for like turn 4 combo kills, but like it's not a super common thing, and there aren't a lot of pub stomping going on. So
that's good.
I have a question in regards to the difference in metas or like experiences. We have this happen a lot where you'll see a new Magic player come to the local shop after like a pre-release or maybe their first FNM. There's a pot of EDH going on and they get instantly hooked on, Commander versus playing Standard maybe. Does that happen a lot over in Finland, or is it just more people have to work their way up to EDH?
I don't know so much. I mean, I'm not like... I live, a reasonable travel from the shop, so I'm only there like 1 or 2 days a week at most. And I think most people come in after playing like Standard and stuff first. I don't see too many coming into Commander as the first thing, but like Finnish culture in general isn't very sort of super chatty. I don't really know a lot about a lot of the people I play with regularly. Like I know their names and I know what decks they have, but like I couldn't tell you what they do for work or how long they've been playing Magic or, and like we're friendly, and
that's about
whatever. But it's just the culture here. You don't have the extra small talk. Whereas I'd probably know a ton of stuff about all these people if we were playing in like Canada or the US or something, or hell, anywhere else in Europe really.
We actually had a new player in the shop last night when I was playing who was new to Commander, had only been playing Magic a couple months, and then saw Commander stuff and sort of put a deck together and got to play his first game with people in a shop of Commander last night, and did a really nice job, but man, his eyes were big. Like you could see him trying to take in like, there's a lot of cards I have no idea what they are on the table right now.
Yeah, like Commander as a new player must be just so overwhelming because like
man, I can't even imagine.
Like you're dealing with 25 years of cards from 3 directions plus your own deck, trying to figure it all out. Like.
Well, and you're dealing with people, the one thing that I think kind of blew him away too a little bit was people shortcutting stuff like, I'm going to go get my fetch land right now and you got to take your turn. That kind of thing, which, if his only experience was probably playing a couple FNMs where even on FNM people tend to try to, follow the rules pretty strictly. I think the shortcutting stuff kind of threw him for a loop too. I saw a few times him unsure what exactly was going on when somebody would go crack a fetch land and say, after this, I'm going to go do this and pass the turn.
Yeah, and I'll do the 2 searches together or whatever.
Right. Yeah.
Like, so play this fetch, crack it, play Kodama's Reach. I'll go get all 3 lands together.
I think it was, that's what it was. One time I had a Crucible of Worlds out and I think Gitrog Monster, so I had 2 land drops and was doing a Prismatic Vista I was playing to, when I crack it, draw a card, go get a fetch, and he was, we slowed things way down because everyone else knew what was going on. But I was like, I'm
yeah,
just going to do this one step at a time because
no, it's important.
You're going to have no idea.
Yeah, it's important to just explain things to people, like, because they're never going to learn if no one actually takes the time to explain. And then also, in that sort of case, it's also good to explain to them why the shortcuts are helpful.
Right.
Right?
Well, and new players are a resource you kind of want to cultivate to a degree, too. I kind of look at it a little bit like, you know, your natural environment where you don't want to just clear cut a forest. You want to kind of maintain that. New players are kind of like that. Like, you don't want to scare them off. You want them to come back and play again.
Absolutely. Like, no, it's totally good. Yep.
So a judge question here for you quickly. What's your favorite weird magic rule or interaction that comes up in Commander? An example that's easy to point to is like the banishing light thing, where if a commander is banishing lighted, you can bring it back to the command zone if the banishing light is removed. Are there any especially weird commander interactions that you kind of...
This is more of a deep cut that's just weird on, like... You have to sort of know the rules pretty well to sort of get it, but, like... So, sending a commander to the command zone instead of the graveyard, or wherever if it would change zones, is a replacement effect. And normally replacement effects can only apply to the event they're modifying once, but the commander movement replacement effect can apply multiple times, so that it can you always basically will get the choice of it for it to happen or not. There's no way to finagle it that the choice can't be made where your commander goes.
Okay, sure.
Which is kind of cool.
So the person you're saying the person whose commander dies, they always will have the option to send it back to the command zone.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Like, I don't know. I mean, it's rare that multiple things would like apply to that, but anyway. Also, another weird one is like just sort of the weird sort of meta nature of a card being a commander. Because, like, no matter what its state, if it's dealing combat damage, that's commander damage. It's always your commander in that state, no matter what. Like, if you play Ixodron and my commander turns face down, and then I play, like, say, Bastion Protector that gives my commander 2/2 and indestructible, my face-down commander will be 4/4 indestructible. Because it's still my commander, even though it's face down.
Even though it's something else, it's still your command. Right, sure.
Or even if it's a copy of something or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, that's because especially those are rules that don't apply to any other format.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's actually kind of one of the things that I like about Commander so much, too, is you do get the weird corner case things being relevant. Mm-hmm. It really kind of gives it some unique flair, I think.
Oh, yeah.
So let's jump into your decks here.
Sure.
What's your favorite? What's your baby currently?
Well, I mean, I have 11 decks, so it's getting to the point where it's hard to sort of... I'm getting to the point where it's like, I'm almost at the point where I can't... I'm getting to the point where I need to accept, okay, I'm going to need... at some point have to stop knowing all of my decks intimately all the time, right?
Sure.
But
I'm impressed that you're still at that point at 11, because I think I'm at 9 decks now, and I've given up that ghost. I am no longer a master of my domain in regards to knowing what all my decks do and having them fully down pat.
Yeah. But for me, I have several favorites depending on the criteria, obviously. But like my pet deck is probably my Alesha Who Smiles at Death deck. I mean, as a trans woman, the story of Alesha meant a whole lot to me when that was published back during Cons Block. And so like, you know, I adopted Alesha as like, you know, a symbol like a lot of people in the trans community did. But then also just Alesha is just such a cool, flexible commander. I've had a lot of fun sort of building and tweaking the deck over time, and it's sort of evolved itself in different directions. And it's always sort of it. And then every set gives me new ideas and like new things to tweak. And so like the deck is never the same month to month, which is really fun.
Sure. I actually remember when Alesha was first released in that set, I completely, like as a commander, was not like I didn't realize how flexible and strong it was. She is a really cool commander, and at least to me, it was not apparent until I've got thumped by her in multiple games.
Oh yeah, she's really, really, really good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, just the power to reanimate some ridiculously large things for 2 mana is pretty good. And then there's been some really, really great additions to the deck recently, like Kuruk, who lets you just pay life to reanimate things now. It's like, yep, I'm in for that.
Well, I think one of the funny things is you look at it like, well, it's only stuff with power 2 or less, so like there's not that many beaters. Well, there's a lot of creatures that are really, really good that have disgusting abilities like Kuruk, but they're 2/2s to kind of offset that.
Also, there's a lot of creatures that are not 2 power or less, but are in the graveyard. So the trick is to find those guys. That was a bigger theme of the deck when I first built it. But yeah, we'll get to more talking about that when we get onto it specifically. As for my other decks, I don't know, I have lots of favorites. Like, any of them could be my favorite depending. They all do cool things, or I wouldn't have them as decks.
I completely feel that like at some point you need to fall in love with the deck.
Yeah, like there honestly like was a point recently where I was thinking about taking apart my Okon and Zyndersplit deck because it wasn't like doing the coin flip thing I wanted it to do. But then I played it again a couple of times and had some really good moments. And it's like, okay, no, this is staying together. I just need to change in my head the reasons why I have this deck.
Sure.
Yeah.
I've been there as well, for sure.
Yeah.
Just one general observation here I want to make too. Your decks do look a little bit like the way Max and I build, where you are not like Mana Base in particular. Look at Mana Base, and there's a lot of ABUR duels in there, and even if the deck itself is not built to be as powerful as it could be, you do not mess around with the Mana Base, and I absolutely respect that. I do the same thing.
Right. Well, I mean, I wouldn't go out of my way to necessarily acquire a fetch land or an original duel for a deck. But, like, I have a bunch of them from my time playing, like, Modern and Legacy and stuff. And so, I mean, I have these cards, and I'm not really playing 60-card competitive anymore. So, I mean, I might as well use these cards. And, like, yeah, I mean, a good mana base is the key to a good deck, right? Like...
Well, in I remember the comment when Arcane Signet first got spoiled... I made the comment like, it's we're kind of homogenizing these mana bases a little bit, and I can't remember who I was talking to online about it. Someone made the comment that like no one is using their mana base to express themselves.
Yeah,
that's just what you use to play Magic. And like, I'm like, that's a good point.
You express yourself through your mana base via its art and via which version of the cards you play. Like, to me, it wasn't something that's always been a big thing for me, but lately I've been sort of getting into the headspace where I want the basic lands in a deck specifically to reflect the commander. So I usually try to either match them by feel or by set to the commanders. And I need to go back to some of my older decks and fix that, I think. But yeah.
I'm a fan of doing that as well, and Max does also. So talking about lands here, looking at your decks, your land counts kind of tend to swing around, and it doesn't seem to necessarily be pegged to the amount of colors you're running or the commander CMC or anything. And this is something I've been struggling with a little bit too. I want there to be some set formula I can kind of follow. But man, it really feels like, at least to me, this is the kind of thing that you just kind of have to figure out based on feel. Yep. Is that the case for you as well?
Yeah, it really is. Like I've learned in the past couple of years, which is like a couple years ago, I only had like 2 or 3 decks, and then I only had maybe 5 or 6 before I got put on the keg, and then since I got put on the keg, it's like, well, I better up my game. So
sure.
but I've learned in that time that the best way to actually just get a working deck is to just put 100 cards together. Like, I have the problem when I'm building a deck of like analysis paralysis or whatever. Like I get like a pile of 150 cards that could be the non-land cards in a deck, right? And it's like, well, what do I cut? And it's like, I've learned that just go through, pick the ones you want to be in the deck the most, put together 100 cards. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be ideal, but you're going to learn how to tweak the deck better by actually having a deck you can play than by not having a deck you can play. And a lot of times, I don't know exactly why, but I'll usually get the mana base about right in that initial build. But like in general, my decks just tend to vary between I think Alesha has my lowest land count at I think Ib has my lowest at 33 and the highest is 38, and it's based on I base it on Commander CMC a bit and how much extra mana I want at various times, but it's really honestly about feel and how much ramp and rocks and stuff I'm playing.
Okay, that's kind of where I'm at too, but I just had a struggle kind of reconciling the fact that there isn't necessarily a right answer.
Right. But again, I feel it's not necessarily a good thing to be too data driven when it comes to Commander. This isn't a 60 card competitive format that we're trying to optimize into oblivion because prizes or invites or prestige is on the line. I just want my decks to feel right when I'm playing them and be able to do what I want to do at that point in the game. I don't care if my choices are optimal as long as I'm enjoying playing the deck.
For sure. I absolutely hear that. I mean, I would rather sometimes lose with style than win without it.
Exactly. And again, depending on the deck, if the deck has a specific theme or strategy, I would rather lose doing things the way I want to do them versus whatever. For example, my newest deck is my Persistent Petitioners deck, and my goal with it is to win by milling out my opponents, right? I know it would be way easier to do self-mill and lab man, but that's not what I built the deck for. It's not what I want to do. It's not how I want to win with the deck, right? So
yeah, don't get me wrong. I'd rather win with style than lose with style, but I know I absolutely get it. So the Alesha deck, we talked about the land counts here a little bit.
Yep.
How has Witch's Oven worked for you? It's a brand new card, and I know it's seen quite a bit of standard play, but I don't know if I've seen it in Commander yet. Has that been solid?
Well, again, it's new. It's still in the testing phase. I think I only got it out for the first time the other day, but it did pretty well in that game. And my Alesha deck has an artifact theme and a lot of things like cranial plating or whatever that count artifacts, and so the fact that it's an artifact that makes artifact tokens and it can buffer my life total, which the deck is also kind of bad about abusing sometimes, is really good, and I enjoy it a lot. And I think it serves me better than something like one of the altars because the deck doesn't really tend to need a lot of extra mana.
Sure. And you're probably not routinely sacking multiple things in a turn. It's just something that you want to then probably bring back with Alesha.
Yeah, it's a way that I can sack something to bring it back with Alesha, or I can, I block an attack and I can sack one of the chump blockers to make a food, or, etc. For example, the game I had it out in the other day, I was in a position where I forget exactly what I was facing down, but there was someone who had a bunch of flying attackers that I was trying to continually fend off. And so I had out Pia and Kieran Nalar. And so I was routinely in a loop of throwing them in, casting them, making Thopters, throwing them in the oven, then bringing them back to make more Thopters, right?
How about the two new fetches we've gotten recently, Prismatic Vista and Fabled Passage? I had a tough time finding room. I think you're probably better off with those, particularly in a 2-color deck or 3-color deck. But man, the mana bases are getting tight these days. It seems to me, at least.
Yeah,
were those easy to find room for? Or
they were fairly easy for me to find room for. I've been actually trying to sort of pare down the number of top lands I have in my decks, and play a few more basics in my decks just to sort of make things a bit smoother. And so in the case of the Alesha deck, these 2 lands specifically replaced the last 2 temples I had in the deck, and so those were easy cuts for me.
And Max, I will make a note here. She only has 6 basics in this 3-color deck, which is the same amount as I have in my 3-color Crush deck that everyone teases me for. So it's not just me who's greedy with my land base.
Well, I actually noticed that amongst most of your decks, Charlotte, is that the low basic count. Is that something you just don't run into something like Back to Basics or Blood Moon on the regular, and you feel safe doing that?
They're really not common in my meta in general, and like I would rather that the 90% of games, or 99% of games where those cards don't come into play run more smoothly. And if I get nerfed by them in one game, then so be it. Right.
Right.
I think that's the exact argument I believe I have used, Max.
Yeah. And
occasionally you're just going to get hosed, and that's just what it is.
I mean, like I've said, I've been trying to add more basics, but like Alesha is a constant struggle for like land, because you need a certain amount of reanimation abilities, you need a certain amount of targets, you need a certain amount of lands and artifacts. The deck's trying to do a bunch of different things, and that really, really fights for space.
How about the Horizon lands, the sacrifice to draw a card, basically the Horizon Canopy in enemy colors? How have those worked for you so far?
Those are amazing in every deck, but especially in Alesha, because it's the one deck where I play Crucible of Worlds.
Oh.
Oh, wow.
Right? So, like, late game, if I have out my Crucible and I have enough lands, I can just draw an extra card every one of my turns. I like them so much that I even found a slot for Cryptic Caves in my 3-color Alesha deck, so...
Cryptic Caves is really good, too.
Yeah.
I love that card.
It's just kind of awkward in a 3-color deck, but luckily...
In the last year, we've really kind of, between the Battle Bond lands and the Horizon lands, and there's a lot of good lands in those 2 cycles in Eldraine, too. We've really gotten spoiled.
Oh, yeah, definitely. The Eldraine lands are great, especially for monocolor decks. So at least the common ones.
Yes.
Although they're definitely on a lower power level, except for the blue one. Which, what were they thinking on that one? But anyway.
We just discussed that. We kind of slept in that blue one when it was spoiled. I don't know quite how, because looking at it, it's super obvious how great it is.
Yeah,
but,
it's interesting. I think it might just be because we've had a few lands that do the same things with creatures, and those are kind of mediocre.
Yeah, maybe.
But the fact is we don't get to recycle spells nearly as much or as easily.
Right. So let's take a look at Angus here. Is there anything special about Angus you want to ask here, Max?
So obviously this is probably a pillow fort deck, whether it's fogs, I'm guessing, right? Everything in here says prevent combat damage.
It's a fog deck. It's not really pillow fort.
Okay.
I'm not running. I don't feel the need to run like propaganda or ghostly prison or anything in there. I mean, the fogs protect me from stuff, and I have a few counter spells to protect me from the other stuff. And the goal is to basically just control combat and let my opponents fight it out, and then have enough resources to kill that last remaining opponent at the end. Though again, this deck has a problem with there's never quite enough good win cons for it. It's okay, I can very easily not lose with this deck, but how do I actually win?
I have a deck that has the same problem and sounds, I would describe it exactly the same way, so I feel your pain.
Yeah, so recently I've found interesting strategies with creatures that are basically unblockable, like Deep Sea Kraken or Hunted Phantasm or Sun Quan, Lord of Wu. Things that can buff my creatures, and then I've also found fun cards that are really good when I'm fogging regularly, like Crescendo of War, which get everyone to kill each other really quickly, and then when I can just push through my damage, it's really fun.
So you have to play the players a little bit with this deck.
Yeah. It's probably my most political deck, I would say, but I mean, it's not that political. It's mostly just setting myself up as not really a rattlesnake, but more of a don't come here, go there sort of thing.
Now this is a deck you mentioned struggles with win cons a little bit.
Yeah.
Approach the Second Sun would be perfect in this deck. You said you tried it at one point, but it just lost its charm.
Yeah, basically. Like, right when Approach first came out, I had it in this deck, and it did good in this deck. I won a couple of games with it, but like a lot of the instant win cards, it really isn't that fun after you win with it a couple of times. It's like, yeah,
sure.
Okay, I cast a spell twice. Well, I cast a spell and no one could counter it the second time. Cool. Like, whoop-de-doo. It's kind of anticlimactic, you know?
I get that. I've had that mental issue myself with something like Torment of Hailfire or something, it's clearly a fantastic card in a lot of decks, but as someone casting it, it always feels underwhelming to win with it.
Yeah, like I recently, or not so recently, like a few months ago, I cut Torment of Hailfire and Exsanguinate out of my mono black deck just because they were sort of the same thing. It's like, oh, I got a bunch of mana and cast this spell that no one countered. Yay.
Sure. And I don't care if somebody else does it. It's not a knock on someone else for casting it.
People who do these things. It's just, for me, it's more, I enjoy winning through other means better, like through combat or through, like a bunch of triggers or something, that sort of
Absolutely.
thing.
Mandate of Peace is another card that in the was in a precon, right? That was in the Commander precons this year.
Yeah, it was.
How was that played for you?
It's good. It's good. I've only gotten it a couple of times, though one of the times I did get it, I managed to put it on my Isochron Scepter, which was really, really fun.
Oh wow.
Yeah, that's nobody likes that. Well, it's great to do, and nobody else likes seeing it for sure.
Yep.
Yeah, nothing good ever came from an Isochron Scepter.
Nah, it's fine. Honestly, like, no one seems to mind the Scepter when I'm putting fogs on it, so...
Yeah, that's, you know what? Absolutely, that's very true. It's only one person you can kind of screw over with it, too.
It's basically just the second decision. Angus, and yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty fair. I buy that.
Yep.
So, of all the fogs in this deck, I know what my favorite is. Do you have any one that you particularly love casting?
I love all of them. A lot of the really weirdo fogs I ended up cutting just because they were ways that people could get around them.
Sure.
But I think my favorite overall is Riot Control, just because it can gain you so much life in the right board state. So Riot Control is 2 and a white. You gain 1 life for each creature your opponents control, and then you fog. Or no, then you just prevent all damage that would be dealt to you this turn. So it can also fog like a fireball or something pointed at your face.
Oh, that's right, because it's all damage. It's not just combat damage.
Damage that would be dealt to you. But also just you can gain a ton of life with it, especially if someone's playing like a token deck or whatever.
You know, I would dare say fogs are maybe underplayed or underrated in Commander.
Yeah, I think they're underplayed to some degree. Like going back to my Phoenix deck again because it's front of my mind as my newest deck. Like the deck's literally like a week and a half old. So, but like in the first build of it, I had Darkness, which is just the black fog in it, which was great. But that ended up getting cut for something else. I forget what, but it's still something that's, I love fogs. Fogs are cool, and I think they are underplayed, especially the ones that actually have good upsides like Dawn Charm or, Riot Control, or the one I think you want to talk about.
Arachnogenesis is one of my favorite cards ever.
Yeah, it's sweet.
Put X 1/2 green spike, and it's only 3 mana. I remember when that card first got spoiled and I read it, I was positive I was reading it wrong.
Yeah.
Just make a pile of 1/2 spiders with reach, and they don't die while you fog.
Yeah, and then fog all non-spiders, yeah.
Yes,
yeah,
that card is so great.
I didn't actually have this card for a while just because the price tag is so high on it.
Yeah.
But I ended up finally getting one in a trade, so...
It's one of those cards that just completely turns around the game and changes what the person who attacked thought was going to happen. Their world has now been upended.
Oh yes, definitely.
That's sudden spoiling is a favorite of mine too, because there's so many times a well played sudden spoiling just upends someone's entire game plan.
Yeah, it's a card I want to play. I just don't have the right deck for it. I don't think.
Sure.
Maybe the Petitioner's deck could be a good home for it, but. I don't know.
And in that deck, you're in blue, so you have so many, mass balance options or something.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and I think Angus is currently the most expensive single commander out there too.
I believe so. Yeah, I traded for mine back when he was at like around $60 Canadian. So this is probably like 6 or 7 years ago. But yeah, I don't know.
There's a lot of legends in Legends, and not very many of them are good. And Angus is legitimately a good commander.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Angus is great. Plus, he looks like Tim the Enchanter. So
Yes, yeah, he looks super cool too.
yeah.
Archon of Valor's Reach. Convince Max to run Archon in his Dromoka deck.
So Archon of Valor's Reach is a really, really good card, and as long as you're not just dropping it as soon as you can always find a good moment to play it and have it really change the game in your favor. It'll always be a target, and obviously will get removed sometime soon, but even if you can control the state of play for like a turn cycle, it can do a lot of work.
See, the deck I would run this in is my Dragon Lord Dromoka deck, and that deck already kind of draws enough hate just because of Dromoka herself.
Yeah, that's fair.
I don't know. I wish I had a way to abuse it, to change it, flicker it somehow more often than I do in that deck.
But
yeah,
other than like Ephemerate or some of the other single-use ones, there aren't many other ways. Yeah, I just actually added Dromoka to the deck, so I haven't drawn her yet, so we'll see how she plays out in it, though. But I figured she seemed like a reasonable thing to run in the deck, so...
Mm-hmm.
Is this a challenging deck for your opponents to deal with and figure out how to handle, just because it's Fogs and it's Angus, which is an old card that people sometimes struggle responding?
A little bit. It's an interesting thing. It's like... You have to be. It's a deck that you certainly have to be that I have to be very cautious when I'm playing, because it's like my only deck that really runs at instant speed. But yeah, I think opponents need to play smartly to sort of get around it, but they also just need me to get unlucky, really.
Sure.
I actually I don't play Angus very often, mostly because it draws out the games a lot, but when I play it, it has a reasonably high win rate, so...
Well, one of the things I remember noticing with Angus, the first time I played against an Angus deck, it's not necessarily threatening in terms of damaging you, so it's easy to kind of ignore a little bit and take other people out.
Oh yeah, exactly.
The problem is, right, I know what you're going to say.
Then you look over and oops, all of a sudden I have Sandworm Convergence and Sun Quan and a Crescendo of War with 10 counters on it. Yeah.
Well, and your commander that can fog somebody out, can fog one player out.
Yeah.
Only has one person left. Like the less players in the game, the stronger Angus gets too.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And that's the kind of lesson I think you don't really realize until you've done it to yourself.
Also, more decks should play comeuppance, because that card is just ridiculous.
I love that card.
When it makes a play, it makes a splashy play.
Yeah.
So how much hate does Shieldred draw in your command zone as a commander?
So Shieldred draws a fair amount, but also she's one of the commanders. There's sort of a class of commanders, I would say probably Shieldred and Alesha and Rakdos, that don't really come out until they're needed. And so there's honestly games that I play where I never cast Shieldred. But she certainly gets eyes on her, and people sort of groan when they see her in the command zone. But it gets...
Well, that can do its own thing too, though, where your commander is sitting there with everyone eyeballing it.
Yeah.
That's its own kind of value.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. I get that.
Yep.
How about a card I always want to not run, and I'm curious what is Baron Moor, which is one of the cycling lands, comes into play tapped.
Yeah.
And you don't really have any way to abuse that in this deck. It would be one thing if this was like a Gitrog deck or something where you're going to be cycling it to get extra value or replaying it from the graveyard with something. Just because it's only one land, does it just not matter that it comes into play tapped sometimes?
It doesn't really matter. I think it and Bojuka Bog and Crypt of Agadim are the only ones in the deck that come into play tapped. And I've had it in the deck since I built it, and it's never caused me any problems. There's some argument to make that maybe a basic swamp would be better because of Cabal Coffers and Cabal Stronghold, but honestly, like, there's times where you just need to draw something other than a land. Or, especially because the deck has a couple of dredgers in the creature base, just being able to get that one extra dredge to maybe get a good target for Shieldred can be good, right? So I think the good of it outweighs the mediocre.
Okay. I do like how you have 4 enchantments in this deck, and none of them were printed prior to 1990 or printed after 1995. They are all original first couple years of Magic enchantments.
I hadn't realized that, but yes, you are correct. So, for those listening, the enchantments are Animate Dead, Dance of the Dead, Gate to Phyrexia, and Necromancy.
Gate to Phyrexia has my all-time favorite bit of flavor text on it.
Ah, yes. The warm rain of grease on my face immediately made it clear I had entered Phyrexia. Jarl, diary.
There's just something about that visual, that mental image just sends chills up my spine. Just it raining grease is horrifying.
Gate to Phyrexia, it's like mono black, I can't deal with enchantments. I can barely, that's like the only way to deal with artifacts. I might as well play it. I had one,
Sure.
And I mean, I'm also, having another sack outlet isn't terrible, so.
That's true. Speaking of sack outlets, a card of mine that is a kind of a pet card that I love that doesn't see much play. Helm of Possession.
Yep.
I am always shocked doesn't show up in more decks that need sack outlets.
Yeah, Helm of Possession is like a really, really good card that most people have never seen, which is weird.
Yes.
It's like,
well, that's probably part of the reason it doesn't see much play is it's so old and hasn't had a reprint that people probably don't even know it's a thing.
But it's like only like a $4 card, right? Like, it's not expensive. It's just... And like,
just old.
And like the cost on it is so cheap. Like, 4 to cast, 2 to tap, sack a creature. Okay, I can sack a token or something I want to die anyway. And I get to take your best creature for as long as I want.
And you can do it at instant speed in response to someone killing a thing.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So good.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you mentioned Rakdos to Showstopper earlier.
Yep.
That's a relatively new deck on your list. Where did that come from? Or what made you want to build Rakdos?
The fact that I opened a foil Rakdos is one thing. I mean, Rakdos Flavorfully is one of my favorite guilds, and I had been considering. So, story actually, tying back to Shieldred. So Shieldred was having a problem where it was actually starting to calcify a bit. Because I was running a bunch of demons and stuff in it. Like, if you look at my Shieldred list, you notice I run 0 demons in it, which is kind of weird for a Black Reanimator deck. I was running, like, a whole bunch of, like, a lot of demons in the deck. And the deck was calcifying. It was having problems with curve. And I wasn't really happy with where it was sitting. And then, basically, I opened this foil Rakdos in a box of, Ravnica Allegiance that I was opening, and it's like, and then the more I thought about it, the more that this allowed me to build both a new deck and solve Shieldred's problem by pulling the demon package out of that, building a dedicated demon tribal deck, and then I was able to play a lot more interesting and smaller creatures in Shieldred. So that was the genesis of the Rakdos deck.
Okay, I get that, and it's also a commander that is just weird and fun.
Yeah, it's weird and fun, and, people are sort of afraid, and what's cool is, because people don't know what's going to happen to their creatures, a lot of times people will sacrifice creatures that might have survived anyway, because there's a 50% chance anything lives or dies.
Sure.
But it's really interesting, because it's like, well, can I flip first? It's like, no. You have to choose now if you're going to sack it. But yeah, so
nice.
It's a really, really cool deck. Really, really cool commander. It's really fun. It's really nice having, most of a Wrath sitting in the command zone.
Right.
I mean, there'll be times where you cast him and out of, 10 creatures, 1 dies, which is kind of sad, but, But then there's times where he gets, everything, so, it really just depends.
I am quite tickled for whatever reason by the fact that there's one mountain in this deck, one lonely mountain.
Yeah. So if you notice, the deck is very, very heavily black.
Yes.
And at first, when I first built the deck, it had no basic mountains in it. But then in one of my recent updates to it, I think like all the cards I took out were mono black, and all the cards I added in were at least red, or like all but one. And so it's like, well, I should probably maybe add a mountain just in case, just in case of like a Path to Exile or whatever. It's good to have that option. Although considering I run Myriad Landscape, maybe I should add two, but I don't think I ever want to fetch two mountains, so I don't know. In most of my other decks, I'll always run at least two of every basic because of Myriad Landscape, which is like a card I find myself putting in just every deck just because it's so freaking good.
Turn 1 Myriad Landscape always feels pretty decent when there's nothing else going on.
Turn 3 fetch, yep.
One thing I took away from this deck looking at it was I was actually just tinkering around with a Kalia Zenith Seeker deck.
Yeah.
And I'm looking through it and I'm like, Fault Line, I remember Fault Line, and I like Magma Quake I saw. I'm like, okay, they do damage to each creature without flying. I'm like, oh yeah, all these demons and in imp stuff have flying. I'm like, well, everything in that Kalia. I'm like, oh man, I need to add those to that Kalia deck I'm messing with.
My Rakdos deck ran a lot more Earthquake effects when I first built it. Like it ran Earthquake, and it ran Subterranean Tremors, the one from Conspiracy.
Yeah.
That one ended up being cut fairly quickly just because this is Rakdos. All of my ramp is artifacts, and I don't want to be blowing up my own artifacts most of the time with that card. So that one got cut, and then I ended up just slowly just trimming down. There ended up being like, just in playing it, it's like there ended up being a lot more just decks with flying threats out that I wanted it to be able to deal with, so I ended up just trimming down to the instant speed ones.
Yeah, that makes sense. You don't want to like go all in entirely on that kind of package.
Exactly. Like
have the Angel Tribal deck just smack in the face.
But like, and also just certain cards have been just really good for the deck. Like Nightmare Unmaking is just a fabulous card for this deck, right? Because I can very easily get to a place where I have like 6 or 5 cards in hand, cast this, and I kill everything with power 4 or less, and like 90% of my creatures survive, and 90% of everyone else's creatures die.
It's the closest black kind of gets to that austere command-ish flexible board wipe.
Exactly. Toxic Deluge can do sort of the same thing, but it's more painful, obviously.
Yeah. Yes.
And I don't need to sell a new one on Toxic Deluge, so.
One thing that's kind of cool here, you're running, instead of like the typical black draw package of, Phyrexian Arena and Night's Whisper kind of stuff, you've got a lot of the more oddball draw cards in here, like Theater of Horrors and Stolen Strategy is what you're using for your advantage. Is there a particular reason for that?
Well, I mean, I do run Read the Bones and Night's Whisper in here, just because the deck needs as much early play as it can get, and demons are not early plays. But, like, part of the whole thing is when I was building the deck, it was just like, well, I mean, it's sort of just a flavorful feel sort of thing. Like, demons are very decadent, so a lot of the things are pretty decadent. Like, I ended up actually recently cutting Phyrexian Arena from most, if not all, of my decks, just because it is kind of slow and clunky, and if it gets disenchanted, then nothing. But like, Theater of Horrors is just, flavorful fitting because it's Rakdos, and it's a cool card, and I'm hitting my opponents anyway. Plus you don't have to keep the cards in hand, which is nice. But like, Stolen Strategy is just like utter decadence, and it seems very much like something a demon would do. Like, this is the price of, my boon, basically.
I like it.
Yeah. If we can, I just want to give a call out to Mark of the Oni, which is a ridiculously fun card. So Mark of the Oni is 2 and a black aura. That's basically control magic, and you just sack it at end of turn if you control no demons.
So in this deck, it's just a better control magic.
Yeah. What's also really fun is if it's early game and you don't have a demon out and someone plays a demon and then you steal a demon with it.
Oh, wow.
And then it's self-feeding. It's like, no, awesome. Only I'm a demon.
No, that's fantastic.
I have to ask, how many games have you won with Liliana's contract?
Zero so far, unfortunately.
No.
One of the most recent game I played with the deck, though, an opponent had to disenchant it before it got back to my turn, or I would have won. So,
Nice.
and I think that's happened like
what?
3 or 4 times since I put it in the deck. But like Liliana's Contract, just being a draw 4, lose 4 for 5 is perfectly fine.
Right.
With
That's true, yeah.
with this threat of victory just sitting there.
Well, it's essentially draw 4, lose 4, and destroy target opponent's removal spell
Yeah.
in this deck, or they lose the game.
Yeah.
I mean, like that's if them having to remove it after you've drawn your cards is still kind of a win.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great card. And this is a absolutely perfect deck for it.
Yeah. Well, obviously, yeah.
So let's take a look at Unesh.
Unesh Cryosphinx Sovereign.
Yes, Unesh Cryosphinx Sovereign, which is a Sphinx Storm deck, which
Yep.
I've seen somebody. There's a relatively famous-ish version of that, but this is one that you said you kind of came to on your own right after Unesh was spoiled.
Yeah, basically, like it more is like I liked Unesh. At the time, I think I didn't have, when I built this deck, I didn't have any blue decks at all, like any decks with blue in them. So it's like I liked the card, I liked Sphinxes. Sphinxes do cool things. So it was like, yeah, sure, I'll build this. So I built it just as a fairly straight ahead Sphinx tribal deck. And then it revealed its true power to me over a couple
As a storm deck.
as a storm deck over a couple of games, and it's like, well, that just happened. So I mean, like I had the usual, like, this is a monocolored deck with high cost spells, so I'm like, sure, so I'm running, my Gauntlet and my Caged Sun and my Nykthos and etc., right? Like your typical like monocolor big mana package, right?
Right.
And then the deck just sort of went off and cast like 15 spells in a turn. And I had this giant battlefield of Sphinxes. But then it's like, oh, it does that. And then it did it again. And it's like, oh, well then, let's just lean in on this. That's honestly like the way that like a lot of my most favorite decks have sort of come to be. Like, at least in my recent ones, like this one and my Erixmithes deck both sort of just revealed what they wanted to be after I built that initial first version of the deck. And, it's like, oh, that's what you do. Okay, well, I'll let you do that then.
Well, that's you made that point earlier about how you kind of just need to get out there with a deck and play it to find out how it works.
Yeah.
And that's a thing, I've had people that have asked me before about advice for content creation, and one of the things I always say is you just have to sit down and do it. You have to just record yourself. Even if you don't air it, you just have to make something, and that's how you get better at it. That's absolutely true with decks too. Like you can theory craft them all you want to, and even goldfish them a little bit in a deck builder, but until you sit down in a pod with a deck, it's really tough to realize how it plays or see where it can possibly evolve to or what it's going to do.
Exactly. Like, I mean, unlike a lot of people, I don't build decks before I physically have the cards, right?
Okay.
I know I'm going to build this deck. I know I want this card for it. I order it, but it doesn't go in the deck until I have the card, right? And I don't like flesh out what my 100 is going to be until I physically have the 100 cards in front of me, unless I'm missing like one or something that I can like proxy. But like until I have, I just cannot do the conceptual build thing. I need to like be sorting cardboard in front of myself. So.
That's interesting. That's exactly how like Chris builds all of his decks.
Yeah.
Yeah, he does.
Yeah. And like so going back a little deeper on what I said about actually just building the deck, if you're having that sort of analysis paralysis with a big heavy list, what I've honestly found of like, twice as many cards as you need, what I've found is the best way to do it is to sort the cards into 3 piles. Need it, would like to have it, can live with, and can live without it. And usually you'll find you have almost enough cards in the need it pile, and then pick however many from the want to have it pile and flesh it out from there. Like, that's usually how I find it ends up going with me anyway.
One of the things I've done to a degree too is been like, well, this is a blue deck and ideally, I'd love to run 4 or 5 counter spells, but maybe I'm just going to not have counter spells in this deck, or there is green in this deck, and maybe I'm just going to go with the rocks I already have versus the land ramp package or something.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
Sometimes you just have to this deck's got a glaring weakness, and I'm just gonna have a weakness so I can get down to 100 cards, and that is what it is.
Yeah, exactly. Like, you can't do everything in a deck, right? Especially when it comes to monocolor or 2-color decks.
You're running a land. Mercadian Masks has a few of these lands. Sappers and Scary comes into play tapped with 2 depletion counters on it, and you can tap it to remove a depletion counter, to add 2 blue mana to your mana pool, and if there are no depletion counters on it, you sack it.
Yeah.
So those are lands that I've seen a ton of times, like in some random collection I've bought or whatever, but I've never ever ran them, and I've always kind of blown them off, or just that's one of those many bad land cycles from back in the day that we got that no one plays. But you've got a few of them in a couple different decks. So I'm assuming you're a fan. How have those have worked for you in a couple of these decks?
They're really good. Like, they basically, I mean, think of them as just sort of limited use, guild lands that just don't bounce a land but go away after a bit. Like, they're just really good. They can just provide a point of boost. And in Unash, the main reason Unash has so much fast mana in it, specifically, is to sort of have the best chance of getting your combo win. You need to go off early, or you at least need to drop Unash early. A lot of times with the deck, I'll drop Unash one turn and then combo the next turn, just because of the nature of mana constriction. But again, if I can drop Unash on turn 2 or turn 3, that's better than if I have to wait until turn 5 or turn 6, right? So any way that can help me get there, including a land that might go away, is fine. And also, by the point where I'm comboing off, the fact that I have 1 less land because I used it up is not hurting me at that point.
Sure, that makes sense. So you're kind of not planning on being around and playing the game still at the time that it matters when it's gone.
There's been a couple of games where it's been one of the few lands I drew early, and it's kind of hurt me because I had to use it for other stuff. But it is what it is. It's it has its downsides like anything else. But I enjoy the land. They're good. They're good in the right deck. I also play Scary in my Erixmathes deck, which also definitely very much wants to get Erixmathes down on turn 3 or earlier. And so, again, just any little advantage that can do that is very helpful.
Well, I think we have time here for one more.
Yeah.
How about your Okan and Zender Split deck?
Yep, Okan and Zender Split, the Eyes of Chaos and Wisdom.
That's a deck that, for the most part, whenever I've seen someone build it, it's kind of been as a meme deck, or something they've done just for weird chaos or coin flip synergy. Yeah. But Don Miner, the guy who runs EDH Rec, right when it came out, Don being kind of a data nerd, sat down and very quickly figured out mathematically being able to double Okan is ridiculously strong. So he was one of the first people I saw that actually built that as a real a deck with the intent of it being just a punch you in the face deck versus kind of a meme thing. And you very much doing the same thing here.
Oh yeah.
And I've not seen that very often. How did you come to that conclusion with this deck?
Again, this is very much a deck that sort of emerged from the early plays. I built the deck. I had definitely an aggro bent to my build of the deck, just because there aren't enough good just coin flip decks. But so I built the deck with a slightly more aggressive edge, but it wasn't sort of all in on one-shotting with Okan the way it is now. But again, it happened in a couple of games. It's oh right, that happens. Let's encourage that. So yeah, again, it's just sort of emergent gameplay sort of thing.
You're kind of. I always think of how Judd Apatow or those guys would just shoot a gazillion miles of footage for those comedies, and then when they were editing it, kind of figure out the movie. Mm-hmm. That's a real thing in Commander decks I've found, where sometimes you just you will figure out what the deck does as you're playing it.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it like I have my idea and I have my theme and my lines that I put in, but like it unless you're specifically on like a heavy tribal theme or heavy specific theme that you want to stick to, it's a lot better, I think, to just let commanders do what they want to do and encourage that and find what you enjoy about it, right? At least in a commander-focused deck.
No, absolutely. And this is one where so many of the cards that are good in this deck are cards that you just aren't ever playing anywhere else. Mm-hmm. So you don't even have necessarily you can't really look back and be like, yeah, this card used to be good in this deck, so it would clearly be good in Oakland's Undersplit.
No, yeah. Well, like I was...
These are just ones that only are good here, basically.
Yeah, this is definitely a reader deck. This is a deck where people are going to have to read like half your cards most of the times. That card does what now? Oh, okay.
They have to read them, and they have to read them written in, the syntax they used back in Ice Age.
Yeah.
Which makes it even worse, and the print is, 8-point font or something.
Oh yeah, exactly. But no, it's just a sweet deck. Like, and there've been actually some really, really good cards for it lately. Like the Royal Scions is just the perfect card for this deck. Like, specifically the +1 target creature gets +2/+0 first strike and trample until end of turn. It's like, yes, I want every piece of that on Okon right now.
Especially in red and blue, where those are things that aren't quite as easy to come across.
Yeah, like I was like in that slot before. I was running Dak Faden just because he had a similar like looting effect, right? And this one was like, well, this is a direct improvement and replacement. So like, yep, in you go.
I will give my commander +2, which is going to double and then double and then double.
Oh, and also first strike and also trample.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's everything you want on
but
one card
it's
right
so
here.
ridiculous. Like, I mean, a lot of people, they look at it and think, oh, he'll be like, what, 6 when you're hitting with him?
Right.
But they don't understand the true nature of randomness. Randomness isn't like heads, tails, heads, tails. Randomness is like heads, 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 tails, heads, heads, tails, 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 heads, 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 heads,
Right.
Randomness is streaky, and a lot of turns you're going to win like 6 flips in a row, and your Okon will be like, what, 6, 12, 24, 48, 96, 192, 192 without any assistance, like...
With trample and first strike because of your Royal Scions?
Oh, yeah, well, like, even more
that's so great.
Like that. Yeah, exactly. It's like, it's so good, and so, like... I still haven't lived the dream of getting a really, really big Okon and then just killing everyone with Chandra's Ignition, but someday. Someday.
Chandra's Ignition is such a good card.
Yeah, someday.
Someday. Very cool.
Yes.
Yeah, this is a deck I would imagine completely catches people off guard, too, if they're not expecting it.
Absolutely. Like, also there's some cards in it that are, like, on theme, but honestly I think should see more play just because they can just mess other people up. Like Risky Move is a card that I put in just because it was a coin flip card, but it is just a weird card that just messes up the game in like a really subtle but really important way. So Risky Move is a 3 red enchantment from Onslaught. It says at the beginning of each player's upkeep, that player gains control of Risky Move. When you gain control of Risky Move from another player, choose a creature you control and an opponent. Flip a coin. If you lose the flip, that opponent gains control of that creature.
Okay. That's...
Yeah.
And it's each player's upkeep.
Yeah. So, like, everyone's flipping a coin, which means so either they lose and have to give their creature to someone else, or they win and, like, draw a card with Cinder Split. So it's win-win for me either way. Right? Because Cinder Split no country whenever a player wins a coin flip, so it doesn't have to be me.
Right, yeah. Yes, and that's, again, a card where you have to read it a couple of times, and no one has just seen that, and no one just by default knows what Risky Move does.
No, but, I think it's a card that honestly has applications outside of coin flip decks. Like,
sure. It's
just this weird sort of chaotic control, just throwing, not like it's not Warp World or Scrambleverse or anything like that, but it's just the subtle perfect amount of chaos to just really spice up a game.
Or in someone at some point's going to blow removal to just not deal with it, which
yeah,
is fine
exactly.
too.
Like, oh no, you blew up that and didn't, blow up my planeswalker, or,
Right.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, Charlotte, thank you very much for coming
No
on the show
problem.
and sharing all these decks with us and talking to
Yeah.
us. We do appreciate
Yes,
Well, I have
thank you
more
so
that
much.
we didn't talk about. Yeah, no worries. I'll have all of that.
it. Yeah. Well, I think, and we talked about this a little bit before, I think we're going to try to have you back on
Yep.
down the road here to talk about, we did a show last year on weird interactions and rules in Commander, and I think we're going to have you on here to talk about that coming up once I get a few more in my my file here
Yep.
of things I want to talk
Sounds
about.
good.
So
I'd be happy to join you again and happy to talk about my decks again, or,
fantastic.
whatever.
Thanks a
Yeah,
lot for coming
no.
on. We do appreciate
well,
it. Thanks for reaching out to us.
Thank you for having me. It's been a blast.
Where can people online find you if they want to say hi?
So you can find me on Twitter at JackalGirl, which is JQLGIRL. You can find me at my Tumblr, which is magicjudge.tumblr.com, and those are the two best ways to get a hold of me. I also have a Patreon, which is linked through the Tumblr, but that's sort of under renovation at the moment. Yeah, so those are the easiest ways to get a hold of me right now.
All right, excellent. Well, you can find us online. You can find me on Twitter at Dana Roach. You can find Max at CMDRCentral_Max. You can find Chris at WiseSquishy1. Our show was edited by Ken Peddle. He's on Twitter at LOAD3R. Our podcast theme is Retro Future Dirty by Kevin MacLeod. That's licensed via Creative Commons. And we'll be back later this week. Until then, I am Dana.
And I'm Max.
And I'm Charlotte.